When did Rome fall? The most commonly used date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is the year 476. In this year, the last Western emperor to rule in Italy, the boy Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer, who declared himself king of Italy. But the world didn't completely change overnight in 476. For one thing, the last several emperors had largely been puppets of military leaders. Odoacer's rule may have been a little bit more explicit, but he was very much following in the footsteps of men like Wickham, another Germanic general who had effectively ruled Rome for over a decade. But also, the loss of the emperor didn't bring about a sudden and absolute change to all of Roman society. Things did change, and the loss of the imperial title was one of many changes happening throughout this period, but they happened gradually over time. Case in point, when you think of ancient Rome, as I'm sure you all do at least as often as I do, what do you picture? Emperors, gladiators, the Roman legions? Sure, those things are all pretty Roman, but how about the Senate? Of all the things that are stereotypically Roman, the Senate is one of the most ancient, and one of the most classical, in both senses of the word. And it's also one of the traditional Roman institutions which lasted the longest. So what happened to the Senate after the fall of Rome? According to Roman tradition, the Senate had existed since the foundation of the city in 753 BC, but it would be some time before it became a central institution of the Roman Republic. By the Middle Republic, the Senate was in charge of Rome's treasury, giving it a great amount of power over the administration of the city itself. It also decided some legal cases and could put forth decrees, which interpreted law and were often used to direct elected magistrates like the consuls, giving it some degree of influence over foreign affairs as well. And eventually it would also have the power to appoint the governors of provinces. With the transition from republic to empire, the Senate's independent power declined, but the Senate itself didn't disappear. The emperors gave all the powers of the popular assemblies to the Senate, meaning that they were, for example, now solely responsible for electing magistrates, but candidates had to be approved by the emperor. And emperors, at least early on, used the Senate as a legitimizing institution. They gave the Senate some authority, but they made sure that it could be reined in if ever it got too unruly. By the late Empire, though, the Senate would also be stripped of much of even this theoretical authority, playing an increasingly minor role in government. Despite all that, the Senate remained important for many Roman aristocrats, and the emperors clearly believed that it retained some value as well, since the Emperor Constantine established a second Senate for the Eastern Empire in his new city of Constantinople. Being a senator was a mark of prestige, a gift of distinction, and it was so often used to reward imperial office holders that in the 4th century, its numbers had swelled to some 2,000 members. Of course, not all 2,000 played a direct role in the Senate. There were, by this point, ranks of senators, with the highest ranks having the emperor's ear, and the lowest being more just honorary titles. In fact, high public office would often automatically grant you senatorship once you completed your term. On top of this, many senators lived far from Rome and Constantinople, and so only a few of them actually sat during Senate meetings. Some preferred to remain on their estates scattered throughout the provinces, content with more local authority, while others, namely the most high-ranking, spent much of their time at the imperial courts, which for much of the 4th and 5th centuries were usually in places other than Rome, such as Ravenna, though this was less of an issue for the Eastern Senate since the imperial court remained in Constantinople. But in the Western Empire, the Senate was still officially in Rome, which, although it was no longer nearly as important as it had once been, was still the largest city in the West and one which remained symbolically significant to the empire. And some senators continued to meet there and deliberate. By now, however, their role was mostly confined to the organization of Roman festivals and games, as well as resolving some legal disputes and governing the city's day-to-day affairs. In a practical sense, then, the Roman Senate went back to its roots as an oligarchic city council, focused on the city of Rome itself. Though there were occasions in the 5th century where some senators managed to gain more political power as imperial power weakened, and some were influential in selecting the next emperor. But things would change to an extent with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the last emperor in 476 and began ruling as King of Italy. But although Odoacer was not a Roman, he'd been part of the Roman world for some time, having served as a military commander in the service of the empire, and was familiar with Roman institutions. He wasn't just some outsider coming in to destroy all things Roman with some sort of grudge against civilization, as some popular accounts like to frame it. Instead, he wanted to preserve Roman institutions as much as he could so that he could rule effectively, and this included the Senate. In fact, the Senate sent an embassy to the Eastern Emperor Zeno after Romulus Augustulus' deposition, requesting that Zeno remain sole emperor, which may have helped maintain peace with Odoacer, who was willing to submit, at least symbolically, to Zeno's authority as a distant sovereign. Despite that, though, Odoacer didn't last all that long, at least not long enough to establish a dynasty. Conflict eventually did erupt with the Emperor Zeno, who tasked another group, the Ostrogoths, with taking Odoacer down. Their leader, Theodoric, would become the new king of Italy in 493. But both Odoacer and the Ostrogothic kings followed a similar pattern. They relied on the surviving Roman aristocracy to maintain a certain degree of continuity between the empire and their own kingdoms. Although there are exceptions, in general in these kingdoms, the so-called barbarian elite became the military aristocracy, while the Romans were the civil. And so the post-Roman kings actually gave the Senate more power than it had held for a long time. The Senate advised and supported the king, and it became the most important pool from which he would elevate individuals to high civil offices. The king was still above the Senate, as the emperors had been, but the two were, in practice, a lot closer, and he relied upon it much more. And those Roman families which managed to maintain generational membership in the Senate were better able to guarantee dynastic importance within the kingdom's government. In fact, the two most famous and influential writers from this period, Boethius and Cassiodorus, were not only senators themselves, but both had fathers who likewise served under the so-called barbarian kings, and Boethius's own two sons served as joint consuls in 522. The Senate could also act independently from the king on occasion, but the importance of the king's favor always remained a significant driving force. And, unfortunately for Boethius, internal rivalry and competition for the king's trust led to him being accused of treason by some of his fellow senators, and he was imprisoned and executed at a time when King Theodoric was feeling particularly threatened by international affairs and feared senatorial collusion with his enemies. Things got more normal again after Theodoric's death in 526. Boethius' sons even had their father's confiscated lands returned to them by Theodoric's daughter, Amalasuintha, who was acting as regent for her son, the new king. However, things would start to go downhill after the boy king's death, when Amalasuintha started to reign independently as queen. Without getting too deep into the weeds of the political intrigue, I'll just say that she was deposed by her cousin and then assassinated, and this was used as justification by the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Emperor Justinian to invade Italy, starting a 20-year-long conflict known as the Gothic War. During the war, several kings succeeded each other and mistrust was rampant. In regards to the Senate, the Goths were afraid, not without reason, that the Roman aristocracy would side with the Byzantine forces, and many senators were stripped of their lands, imprisoned, and executed. This made the Gothic War one of the most devastating blows to the continued existence of the Roman Senate. But Byzantine victory wouldn't make things any better. You see, it wasn't just the Goths who mistrusted the Romans. It was also Justinian, who seemed to think that they didn't do enough to support the Byzantine effort and wasn't too convinced of their loyalty. He ended up stripping the Roman Senate of most of its Italian offices and tried to consolidate power into the east. Some of the most powerful Italian senators then moved away to maintain political relevance, though the rest had a hard time competing with the established senatorial elite in the Eastern Empire. The scholar S.J. Barnish suggests that this may have been in part due to the fact that Byzantine elite status was starting to blend military and civil responsibility, whereas Italian senators were too accustomed to being confined to civil government, with military affairs generally being in the hands of the Gothic elite. In any case, if we look back at what was left of the actual Roman Senate at this point, It shrank down once again to become an institution largely confined in relevance to the city of Rome. This situation would become further entrenched with the conquest of much of Italy by another Germanic people, the Lombards, starting in 568. As the Lombards took over much of Italy, the pool of Roman senators who maintained ties to the actual city of Rome itself became smaller and smaller, not to mention less and less wealthy. Now, officially, Rome was subject to a Byzantine official based in Ravenna called the Exarch, but the Exarchs of Ravenna were never all that effective, and many Italian cities became de facto independent, being ruled by their local duke, as was most famously the case with Venice and Naples, amongst others. Rome also had a duke at this time, but we know almost nothing about him. Instead, it was Rome's bishop, the Pope, who became the most important leader of the city. And as Rome had to fend for itself, it seems that the Pope took more and more power away from the Senate and into his own hands, including funding public works and organizing the city's defense. As far as we can tell, there doesn't seem to have been much of a fuss. It's probably around this time then that the Senate ceased to exist. We don't have any precise official date of dissolution or anything like that, but we read in Pope Gregory the Great's letters that by his day, Rome's senatorial tradition was in a sad state. There are mentions of the Senate into the early 600s, but it's not clear whether this is just an appeal to tradition or proof of an actual functioning political body. In all likelihood, the Roman Senate went out not with a bang, but with a whisper. But if you thought we were done, you clearly haven't looked at how much time is left in the video. Because although the classical Senate disappeared, its memory did not, and there was actually an attempt to revive it centuries later. But let's back up for a second. Even after the 600s, Rome's elite, whoever they might be at any given time, always remembered that the Senate had once been a thing, and even after it was gone, they continued to call themselves senators, to the point where senator just became synonymous with Roman aristocracy. And there was always some kind of Roman aristocracy. They were subject to the Pope, but the relationship between the Pope and local elites varied across the centuries. Competition amongst powerful Romans was often focused on the papacy itself as well, since it was largely those powerful Romans who determined who the next pope would be. But that changed in 1046. By now, Rome was tied to the Holy Roman Empire, the medieval spiritual successor to the ancient Western Roman Empire, and whose emperors were predominantly German. In 1046, there was popular upheaval in Rome against Pope Benedict IX, and the current emperor, Henry III, was asked to intervene, which he did, deposing Benedict and replacing him with a new German pope, Clement II. This was the first time in centuries that the pope had been someone other than a Roman, and it began a period of political crisis in Rome. You see, Clement was the first in a line of several German and otherwise non-Roman popes who were incredibly reform-minded, something which would have a great many consequences for the future of Catholicism and medieval Europe more broadly. But this reform-mindedness also made them much more internationally focused and internationally relevant, as they made the papacy much more central to the Catholic Church. Suddenly, all of Europe was interested in who would be the next pope, and popes filled their courts with cardinals from across the Catholic world, while also trying more and more to become independent of any attempts to control them by anyone outside the Church. For many clerical writers across Europe, this was seen as a great thing. But for the Romans, it was a problem, because the Pope was still the main ruler of Rome, and they started to feel like they were being alienated from power. On top of this, throughout the north of Italy, many cities were beginning to establish communal governments led by the urban aristocrats and other prominent individuals with an ideology of freedom and popular rule. This came about as imperial authority weakened in these areas, and the urban middle classes became more and more important. For Rome, various factions continued to try and control the papacy, but now it was intimately tied to international affairs. Disagreements between popes and emperors, who often tried to install their own anti-popes, led to outright civil war between the neighborhoods and the great noble families of the city. But things would finally boil over late in the reign of Pope Innocent II. Innocent was one of the few popes from Rome at this time, and he managed to largely get the great families on his side, but the people more broadly and the local Roman clergy still felt alienated. One of the things which the sources point to as a possible straw that broke the camel's back was the lenient terms of surrender which Innocent gave to the city of Tivoli after concluding a war with them, which angered the Roman militia who had hoped for plunder from the city. But regardless of whether it was that or something else, in the summer of 1143, as the Pope lay dying, a group of Romans, largely members of the middle elite of artisans, legal professionals, administrators, merchants, and minor landlords, came together on the Capitoline Hill and proclaimed the creation of a commune, led by a new revived Senate and the people of Rome. They also built their meeting place on the Capitoline Hill, the Palazzo Senatorial, which actually survives to this very day and houses the current municipal government of Rome, though it's been thoroughly altered and renovated since the 12th century. The commune was in immediate conflict with the papacy, who tried several times throughout the 1140s to put an end to it, but without success. The Senate took on legal, financial, and military authority in Rome, repairing parts of the Roman walls and raising the militia to defend it against Norman intervention on the Pope's behalf. They even invited the German Emperor-elect Conrad III to come to Rome and be crowned by the Senate instead of by the Pope, as was typically the case, referring to themselves in their letters with the classical abbreviation SPQR. Now, the communal government didn't have absolute control over the whole of Rome, and in practice, the city was largely ruled jointly by both the Senate and the Pope, especially once things simmered down between them. Likewise, the Senate was constantly seeking papal recognition, which they finally officially received in 1188. From then on, the relative authority of each party over Roman affairs ebbed and flowed, though the popes were usually on top, with the communal government mostly being a force to try and check their power and support popular interests within the papal government. The Senate itself would also change over time. By 1190, there were 56 senators, elected in public assemblies. But starting in 1191, the office of senator would be held by a single individual, who was the head of several communal assemblies, acting more like the president of a modern republic. In 1238, the number of senators was brought up to 2, and by this time, the senatorship and many other communal offices were increasingly being dominated by a newly emerging aristocracy of barons in the city. The Roman commune would remain a force to counter papal authority, occasionally cooperating, occasionally in conflict, until the papacy managed to gain enough of an upper hand to abolish it in 1398, after 250 years of its existence. This set the popes up to hold the dominant position which would define Rome during the Renaissance. But the legacy of the commune continued to be felt even then. One of its most enduring legacies is the fact that it was largely because of the Roman commune that papal authority in Rome shifted from the Lateran Palace over to the Vatican across the Tiber River, where the popes were separated from most of the Roman populace by a bridge and the Castel Sant'Angelo. The story of the medieval Roman Senate is a reminder of the continued importance of classical influence well into the Middle Ages. It took a century after the fall of Rome for the Senate to disappear as well, not because it was inevitable or because it couldn't possibly survive or adapt to a new post-Roman reality. We've seen its initial success in the kingdoms of Odoacer and the Ostrogoths, that it had the potential to actually thrive. Instead, it disappeared because of particular events which took place in Italy in the 6th century. But the idea of the Senate never vanished. Romans never forgot that it was a part of their history. And when it was time for them to establish a new institution to represent the people of Rome, it was that memory that they called upon, that legacy of their past. A past which they were reminded of whenever they looked around themselves at the countless ruins still dotting the urban landscape. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you next time.